The gunshot pierced the quiet Montana night just as Samuel Northrop was stoking the fire in his humble cabin. A second shot followed, then the unmistakable sound of a horse galloping away into the darkness. Samuel grabbed his Winchester rifle from above the mantel and cautiously approached the door. The year was 1878, and in this remote corner of the Montana Territory, unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. He cracked the door open, rifle at the ready, when he saw her, a woman crumpled on his porch, blood seeping through her clothing and onto the weathered planks. Samuel's instincts took over as he quickly scanned the surrounding darkness before setting his rifle aside and kneeling beside the stranger. "Madam, can you hear me?" he asked, gently turning her over. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing a startling shade of green. "Help," she whispered before losing consciousness again. Samuel carefully lifted the woman, noting her slender yet sturdy frame beneath the bloodied dress. Inside, he cleared his kitchen table with one sweep of his arm and laid her down. The lamplight revealed a beautiful face framed by auburn hair, but more urgently, it showed a bullet wound in her left shoulder and what appeared to be a knife slash across her right side. "Damn it all," Samuel muttered, running to fetch his medical supplies. At 32, Samuel Northrop had spent the last 5 years alone on this homestead after returning from the war. The skills he'd gained as a field medic during those bloody years now seemed providential as he assessed the woman's wounds. The bullet had gone clean through her shoulder, painful but not immediately lethal. The knife wound worried him more. It was deep and still bleeding freely. Samuel worked methodically, cutting away the fabric of her dress around the wounds. He cleansed them with whiskey, causing her to moan in pain despite her unconscious state. The stitching would be the worst part. "I'm sorry for this, madam," he said, threading a needle, "but you'll thank me later if you make it through." His fingers moved with practiced precision as he stitched the knife wound first, 17 careful sutures to close the gaping flesh. The bullet wound required less, but he worked just as meticulously, ensuring the entry and exit wounds were properly cleaned and closed. By the time Samuel finished, dawn was breaking over the Montana mountains. He covered the woman with a blanket and gently lifted her head to place a folded towel beneath it. Only then did he allow himself to slump into a chair beside the table, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, confirming she still lived. Who was she? Why was someone shooting at her? Samuel had deliberately chosen this isolated patch of land to avoid the complications of people. Yet here was trouble, quite literally bleeding on his doorstep. The woman's fever began mid-morning. Samuel placed cool cloths on her forehead and checked her stitches regularly for signs of infection. It wasn't until the second day that she opened her eyes again. "Water," she rasped. Samuel held a cup to her lips, supporting her head as she drank greedily. "You're safe now," he said. "I'm Samuel Northrop. You're at my homestead about 15 miles from Pinewood Creek." "Catherine," she whispered. "Catherine Preston." "You've been shot, Miss Preston, and stabbed too from the looks of it. Mind telling me who's trying to kill you?" Fear flashed in her eyes before she answered. "Men who work for Victor Blackstone. I've seen too much." Samuel's jaw tightened. Blackstone was notorious throughout the territory, a wealthy rancher who ruled the region like a feudal lord, using intimidation and violence to expand his holdings. "Rest now," Samuel said, noticing her eyelids growing heavy. "We'll talk more when you're stronger." For 5 days, Samuel tended to Catherine, changing her bandages, feeding her broth, and helping her sip water. Her fever broke on the 3rd day, and with it came more strength and clarity. On the 6th day, he helped her sit up for the first time. "I need to thank you properly, Mr. Northrop," Catherine said, her voice stronger now. "You saved my life. Samuel shrugged uncomfortably. Anyone would have done the same. No, she said firmly. They wouldn't, especially not knowing who's after me. Samuel finally pulled up a chair beside her. I think it's time you told me your story, Miss Preston. If Blackstone's men are hunting you, I need to know what I'm up against. Catherine's hands trembled slightly in her lap. I was a school teacher in Helena. 6 months ago, I took a position as a governess for Blackstone's nephew and niece after their parents died. She paused, gathering strength. At first, it seemed ideal. The pay was generous and the children were sweet, but I started noticing things. Meetings in the night, men coming and going with strange cargo, documents I wasn't meant to see. What kind of documents? Samuel asked. Land deeds, death certificates, forged papers showing Blackstone as the rightful owner of properties that belonged to homesteaders who mysteriously disappeared or died. Her green eyes met his directly. He's been systematically driving people out or killing them, then claiming their land. When they resist, accidents happen. Samuel nodded grimly. He'd heard rumors of similar tactics throughout the territory. 3 nights ago, I overheard him planning another accident for the Wilson family. Their farm borders his northern pastures. Catherine's voice cracked. I tried to leave that night to warn them, but one of his men caught me. I managed to escape, but not before. She gestured to her wounds. And you rode all the way here? Samuel asked, impressed despite himself. I rode until my horse couldn't go any further. When I saw your cabin's light, I hoped. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Samuel stood and paced the small cabin. He'd come to Montana to escape violence and conflict, to live in peace. Now violence had found him anyway. Part of him wanted to put Catherine on the next stage out of the territory once she could travel, but he knew Blackstone's reach was long. The Wilsons, Catherine said suddenly. I need to warn them. You're in no condition to go anywhere, Samuel said firmly. I'll ride into town tomorrow for supplies and find out what I can. Catherine looked as if she might argue but nodded instead. Thank you, she said softly. I'm sorry to bring this trouble to your door. That night, Samuel moved Catherine to his bed, taking the floor for himself. As he lay listening to her steady breathing in the darkness, he wondered what twist of fate had brought her to his doorstep of all places. His homestead was remote, deliberately chosen for its isolation. Mr. Northrop, Catherine's voice floated through the darkness. Yes. Why do you live all the way out here alone? Samuel was silent for so long that Catherine thought he might have fallen asleep. Finally, he answered. After the war, I couldn't stand being around people much. Too many faces reminded me of ones I'd lost. You were a doctor in the war. Field medic, he corrected. I learned to stitch and patch men up enough to get them to real doctors. Sometimes it worked. Often it didn't. Another silence fell between them. I'm glad it worked for me, Catherine said softly. Samuel found himself smiling in the darkness. So am I, Miss Preston. So am I. The next morning, Samuel prepared to ride into Pinewood Creek. He left Catherine with a loaded revolver, extra water, and strict instructions to stay hidden. If anyone comes, use the cellar door under the rug, he instructed. There's a small space beneath the house where you can hide. Catherine nodded, clearly nervous but determined. Be careful, she said. Blackstone has men everywhere. I'll be back before sundown, Samuel promised. Pinewood Creek was a small but growing settlement with a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and a few other essential businesses. Samuel tied his horse outside the general store and stepped inside, immediately noticing the wanted poster on the wall near the counter. His heart sank as he recognized Catherine's face on the paper. The poster labeled her a thief who had stolen valuable items from her employer, Victor Blackstone. The reward was substantial $500. Terrible business that, said Jacob Miller, the store proprietor, following Samuel's gaze. "Blackstone's been through here twice already with his men searching for her." Samuel kept his expression neutral. "That's so. When was he here last?" "Yesterday afternoon. Said she might be heading this way." Jacob leaned closer. "Between you and me, I don't believe she stole anything. Blackstone's got a reputation, and it ain't for honesty." Samuel gathered the supplies he needed while listening to the local gossip. The Wilson family was still alive and well on their farm, as far as anyone knew. Blackstone's men had been seen in the area, however, making people nervous. As Samuel was paying for his goods, the saloon doors across the street burst open, and a man stumbled out, followed by loud laughter. Samuel froze. He recognized the man, Curtis Hatcher, one of Blackstone's hired guns. "You heading back soon, Sam?" Jacob asked. "Storm's brewing from the north. Might want to beat it home." "Thanks for the warning," Samuel replied, gathering his parcels. He kept his head down as he loaded the supplies onto his horse, painfully aware of Hatcher watching from across the street. Samuel was halfway home when he heard riders approaching from behind. Guiding his horse off the trail into a thick stand of pines, he watched as 4 men galloped past Hatcher among them. They were heading directly toward his cabin. Cursing under his breath, Samuel urged his horse through the woods, taking a circuitous route that would bring him home ahead of the riders. The storm was rolling in fast, dark clouds gathering overhead as he pushed his mount to its limits. Samuel reached a ridge overlooking his property just as the first drops of rain fell. Below, he could see the riders approaching his cabin from the main trail. Drawing his rifle, he took careful aim and fired a warning shot that kicked up dirt near the lead rider's horse. The men scattered for cover as Samuel fired again, giving Catherine the distraction she needed. He prayed she'd remember his instructions about the cellar. The rain came down in sheets as Samuel picked his way down the hillside, using the weather and terrain for cover. Thunder boomed overhead, masking the sound of his approach as he made his way to the back of the cabin. When he reached the rear window, he tapped lightly 3 times. After a moment, the window inched open. "It's me," he whispered. Catherine's pale face appeared in the opening. "There are men out front," she whispered back. "I know. Are you in the cellar?" She nodded. "I can get back down." "Good. Stay there. I'm going to lead them away." Before she could protest, Samuel moved away, circling toward the barn. He needed to create a distraction big enough to draw all 4 men away from the cabin. Inside the barn, he worked quickly, gathering kerosene and rags. The storm was raging now, but that wouldn't stop the fire he planned to start in the old deadfall a quarter-mile from the cabin. It would burn hot and fast despite the rain, creating enough light and smoke to draw attention. Samuel slipped through the woods like a ghost, placing his fire starters strategically. When everything was ready, he struck a match and watched as the kerosene-soaked rags ignited. Within minutes, the deadfall was ablaze, flames leaping upward despite the downpour. From his position, Samuel could see Hatcher and his men notice the fire. After a brief conversation, 3 of them mounted up and rode toward the blaze. 1 remained behind, watching the cabin. Samuel circled back, approaching the lone gunman from behind. The man never heard him coming through the storm's noise. A quick strike with the butt of Samuel's rifle, and the sentry crumpled unconscious. Samuel dragged the man into the trees, binding and gagging him securely before returning to the cabin. He tapped on the window again, and moments later was helping Catherine climb out. "We need to go," he said urgently. "They'll be back once they realize the fire's a diversion." "Go where?" Catherine asked, wincing as her wounded shoulder protested the movement. "I have a place," Samuel replied, leading her toward the barn. "A line shack up in the hills that no one knows about. We'll be safe there until we figure out what to do next." They saddled 2 horses as quickly as possible, Catherine struggling but determined. Samuel packed what supplies he could, including his medical kit and extra bandages. Within 10 minutes, they were riding away from the cabin, using the storm as cover. The line shack was 3 miles up into the foothills, accessible only by a narrow, winding trail that was treacherous in the best weather. In the storm, it was nearly impassable, but Samuel knew every rock and turn. Catherine followed closely, her face set in grim determination despite the pain she must have been feeling. By the time they reached the shack, both were soaked to the skin and shivering. The one-room structure was basic but sound, with a stone fireplace and a single bed. Samuel quickly lit a fire while Catherine stood dripping by the door. "We should check your wounds," he said once the fire was crackling. "The ride couldn't have done them any good." Catherine nodded, suddenly looking exhausted. "I think the shoulder's bleeding again." Samuel helped her remove her sodden jacket, noticing how she winced with each movement. The bandage on her shoulder showed a spreading crimson stain. "I need to restitch this," he said after examining the wound. "The ride tore a few sutures." Catherine nodded, biting her lip. "Do what you must." Samuel worked efficiently, cleaning and restitching the wound. Catherine remained silent throughout, her only reaction an occasional sharp intake of breath. When he finished, he wrapped fresh bandages around her shoulder and checked the knife wound on her side, which had held up better. "You're quite brave, Miss Preston," he said as he packed away his supplies. "Catherine," she corrected. "After all this, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." Samuel smiled slightly. "Catherine it is, then, and I'm Samuel." He found her a dry shirt from his pack, much too large but better than her wet clothes, and turned his back while she changed. When he turned around again, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking small and vulnerable in his oversized clothing. "You should rest," he said gently. "Take the bed." "I'll keep watch." Catherine looked like she might argue but was clearly too exhausted. She lay down and Samuel covered her with the single blanket. "Samuel," she said as he moved toward the door, "thank you, not just for the stitches, for believing me." He nodded once, unexpectedly moved by her gratitude. "Get some sleep, Catherine. We've got difficult days ahead." While Catherine slept, Samuel sat by the window, watching the storm rage outside. The thunder reminded him of artillery fire, bringing unwelcome memories of battlefields and dying men. He'd come to Montana to escape those memories, to find peace in solitude. Now he was thrust back into conflict, with an injured woman depending on him. Strangely, he didn't resent Catherine's presence as he might have expected. There was something about her courage and determination that spoke to him. Most women would have broken down after what she'd endured, but Catherine maintained a quiet strength that he admired. The storm passed by morning, leaving a clear, crisp day in its wake. Catherine awoke looking better, some color returned to her cheeks. Samuel had prepared coffee on the small stove and the aroma filled the tiny cabin. "How long do you think we can stay here?" she asked, accepting the tin cup he offered. "A few days at most," Samuel replied. "Blackstone's men will search everywhere once they realize we've fled." "What then? I can't keep running forever, and I won't keep putting you in danger." Samuel considered their options as he sipped his coffee. "There's a U.S. Marshal who passes through Pinewood Creek every month or so. Holden's his name. He's honest from what I've heard. If we could get your story to him with evidence—" "The documents," Catherine said suddenly. "I took some papers before I fled, proof of what Blackstone's been doing. They're hidden in the lining of my jacket." Samuel retrieved her still damp jacket from where it hung near the fire. Catherine carefully tore open a seam in the lining and extracted several folded papers protected by oilskin. Land deeds with forged signatures, she explained, spreading them out. A letter instructing his foreman to take care of the Johnson family who refused to sell. And this, she held up a ledger page. Records of payments to officials who looked the other way. Samuel examined the documents carefully. This might be enough, especially if the Wilsons and others are willing to testify. If they're still alive, Catherine said grimly. According to the talk in town yesterday, the Wilsons are fine for now. Blackstone might be waiting to deal with you first. Tie up that loose end before making another move. Catherine nodded, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her stitches. Let me check your wounds again, Samuel said, noticing her discomfort. The morning light through the cabin's single window illuminated Catherine's face as Samuel gently removed the bandage from her shoulder. Her skin was warm but not feverish, a good sign. The wound looked clean, the new stitches holding firm. You're healing well, he said, applying a fresh bandage. You're stronger than you look. I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania, she explained. My father taught me and my sisters to work as hard as any man. What brought you out west? Samuel asked as he finished his ministrations. A shadow crossed Catherine's face. After my father died, the farm went to my brother-in-law. He didn't think I contributed enough to earn my keep. She looked away. I decided teaching would give me independence. When the position in Helena opened, it seemed like providence. Samuel sensed there was more to the story than she was sharing, but he didn't press. Everyone in the West had something they were running from or toward. What about you? Catherine asked. You mentioned the war, but not what brought you to Montana. Samuel was silent for a moment, considering how much to reveal. After the war, I drifted. Tried going home to Illinois, but everything felt wrong, too many ghosts. He glanced out the window at the mountains. I kept moving west until I found this place. Something about the mountains spoke to me. They don't change much, don't care about men's wars or troubles. You've been alone all this time, Samuel nodded, by choice, until you bled all over my porch. A smile tugged at the corner of Catherine's mouth. I am sorry about that. To his surprise, Samuel found himself smiling back. I'm not, he said softly, then quickly added, we should plan our next move. Marshal Holden isn't due for another 2 weeks, according to the talk in town. For 2 days, they remained at the line shack, Samuel venturing out only to hunt and check for signs of pursuit. Catherine grew stronger, moving around the small cabin with increasing ease. Though her wounds still limited her, on the 3rd morning, Samuel returned from checking his snares to find Catherine outside the cabin, her face tilted up toward the sun. You shouldn't be out in the open, he cautioned, though not unkindly. I needed to feel the sun, she replied. I can't live in fear forever, Samuel. He placed the rabbits he'd caught on a stump and moved to stand beside her. No, you can't, but caution isn't the same as fear. Catherine turned to face him, her green eyes searching his. What happens if we can't prove what Blackstone's doing? What if the marshal doesn't believe us? Then we'll find another way, Samuel said with more confidence than he felt. The important thing is keeping you alive until then. And you, she asked softly. What happens to you when this is over? Back to your solitude? The question caught Samuel off guard. He hadn't thought beyond keeping Catherine safe and bringing Blackstone to justice. The idea of returning to his solitary existence afterward suddenly seemed less appealing than it once had. Before he could formulate a response, a twig snapped in the forest behind them. Samuel whirled, pushing Catherine behind him as he drew his revolver. A moment later, a deer bounded through the underbrush, startling them both. The tension broken, Catherine laughed softly. Fearsome creature, she murmured. Samuel holstered his gun, embarrassed by his overreaction. We should head back inside. That evening, as they shared the rabbit stew Samuel had prepared, Catherine broached a subject they'd been avoiding. "We can't stay here indefinitely," she said. "Sooner or later, Blackstone's men will find us, or we'll run out of supplies." Samuel nodded. "I've been thinking about that. There's a settlement about 2 days' ride from here, Silver Creek. It's small, but they have a telegraph office. We could send word to Marshal Holden, ask him to meet us there." "Blackstone might have men there too," Catherine pointed out. "It's a risk," Samuel acknowledged. "But less of one than staying put or trying to reach Pinewood Creek again." Catherine considered this. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow, at first light. The sooner we move, the better." That night, as Samuel prepared to take his usual position sleeping on the floor near the door, Catherine stopped him. "There's room enough for both of us," she said, gesturing to the narrow bed. "You've slept on the floor for 3 nights now. It can't be comfortable." Samuel hesitated. "It wouldn't be proper." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "You've seen me half naked while stitching my wounds, Samuel. I think we're past worrying about proprieties." Despite himself, Samuel felt heat rise to his face. All the more reason to maintain some boundaries now. Something flickered in Catherine's eyes, disappointment, perhaps, or understanding. "As you wish," she said softly, turning away. Samuel lay awake long after Catherine's breathing had steadied into sleep, troubled by emotions he hadn't felt in years. He'd grown accustomed to solitude, had even embraced it as a shield against the pain of attachment and loss. But Catherine's presence had awakened something in him he'd thought long dead, a yearning for connection, for something beyond mere survival. Dawn came with a thin layer of frost covering the ground outside the cabin. They prepared in silence, packing their meager supplies and readying the horses. Samuel helped Catherine mount, careful of her injured shoulder, then swung up onto his own horse. "Stay close," he instructed as they set off down the narrow trail. "The path gets tricky in places." They rode through the morning, descending from the foothills into more open country. Samuel kept them off the main trails, following game paths and dry creek beds where possible to avoid leaving obvious tracks. By midday, they'd covered nearly 15 miles. "We should rest the horses," Samuel said, drawing to a halt in a small clearing beside a stream. Catherine dismounted with greater ease than the day before, her strength clearly returning. While Samuel tended to the horses, she spread their simple meal of jerky and hardtack on a fallen log. "Tell me about your home in Pennsylvania," Samuel said as they ate. "You mentioned sisters." Catherine's expression softened. "3 of them, all older, all married with children now. Our farm was small but good apple orchards mostly, some vegetables and a few dairy cows." She plucked a blade of grass, twisting it between her fingers. "Autumn was my favorite time. The whole place smelled of apples and cinnamon. My mother would make pies from sunup to sundown." "Sounds nice," Samuel said, trying to imagine a life so rooted in family and tradition. "It was," Catherine agreed, "until the war came." Her expression clouded. "My brother joined up with the Union. He didn't come home. Then my father took ill 2 winters ago, without him." She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. "But that's all past now. What about your family?" Samuel hesitated, then decided honesty was the least he owed her after all she'd shared. "My mother died when I was young. My father raised me and my brother in Chicago. He was a doctor, a good one, wanted us both to follow in his footsteps." He stared into the distance. "My brother did. He had the temperament for it, the steady hands. I was always more restless." "Yet you became a medic in the war," Catherine observed. "Not by choice, initially. I was assigned to a field hospital after being wounded at Shiloh. Turned out I had a knack for keeping men alive long enough to reach the surgeons." Samuel's voice grew distant. "My father died before the war ended. My brother Charles continued his practice in Chicago. Last I heard, he was doing well. You don't write to him? Samuel shook his head. The war changed me, changed how I saw everything. Charles. He wouldn't understand the man I've become. Catherine studied him for a long moment. I think you underestimate both yourself and your brother. Before Samuel could respond, a distant sound caught his attention. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, approaching from the east. Mount up, he said urgently, already moving toward the horses. Riders coming. They were back in the saddle within moments, pushing deeper into the forest away from the sound. The terrain grew rougher, forcing them to slow despite the danger behind them. There's a ravine ahead, Samuel called over his shoulder. If we can reach it, we can follow it north, away from our original route. Catherine nodded, her face set with determination as she urged her horse forward. They reached the ravine, a steep-sided cut through the landscape, with a small stream at its bottom, and carefully picked their way down. The ravine provided good cover, its walls high enough to conceal them from anyone on the ridges above. They followed its winding course for nearly an hour before Samuel called a halt. Listen, he said quietly. In the silence, they heard nothing but the burble of the stream and the occasional call of a bird. I think we've lost them, Catherine said. Samuel nodded, though his expression remained cautious. For now. But they're still between us and Silver Creek. We'll need to find another route. They continued north through the ravine until it gradually shallowed and opened into a broad valley. The sun was low in the sky now, casting long shadows. We'll need to make camp soon, Samuel said. There's no way we'll reach Silver Creek today, not with the detour. They found a sheltered spot beneath a rocky overhang, well hidden from casual observation. Samuel built a small, smokeless fire while Catherine laid out their bedrolls. The night turned cold quickly, stars appearing in a crystal-clear sky. They sat close to the fire, its meager warmth barely holding back the chill. You're shivering, Samuel observed, noticing Catherine's trembling hands. I'm fine, she insisted, but her body betrayed her with another shiver. Samuel hesitated only briefly before moving to sit beside her, offering his blanket. Here. Then you'll be cold, she protested. I've endured worse, he said simply. Catherine accepted the blanket but then surprised him by shifting closer until their shoulders touched. We can share, she said softly. Body heat. Samuel stiffened momentarily, then relaxed, acutely aware of the warmth of her pressed against his side. They sat in silence for a time, watching the flames dance. I've been thinking, Catherine said finally, about what happens after if we succeed against Blackstone. I can't go back to being a governess or schoolteacher, not in Montana territory. He has too many connections. You could go home, Samuel suggested. Back to Pennsylvania. Catherine shook her head. There's nothing for me there anymore. My sisters have their own lives, their own families. I'd be an obligation, not a help. She turned slightly to look at him. What about you? Would you really go back to your cabin and your solitude? The question hung in the air between them. Samuel found himself struggling to imagine returning to his isolated existence. These past days with Catherine had awakened something in him, a hunger for companionship he'd denied for too long. I don't know, he admitted finally. For years, being alone seemed the only way I could find peace. Now I'm not so sure. Catherine's gaze was steady on his face, searching. Perhaps there are other ways to find peace. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Samuel felt drawn toward her, the distance between them suddenly unbearable. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned closer. Catherine met him halfway, her lips soft against his. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant, then deepened as she responded with unexpected fervor. Samuel's hand came up to cup her cheek, his fingers tangling in her hair, When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Samuel rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed, savoring the closeness. "I didn't expect this," he murmured. Catherine's laugh was soft and warm against his skin. "Nor did I. When I collapsed on your porch, romance was the furthest thing from my mind." Samuel pulled back slightly to look at her, his expression serious. "Is that what this is? Romance?" "I don't know what to call it," Catherine admitted. "But I know that when I think of the future now. You're in it." The admission hung between them, both thrilling and frightening in its implications. Samuel had avoided attachments for so long, convinced they would only lead to pain. Yet here he was, already bound to this woman in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. "We should rest," he said finally, though he made no move to pull away. "We have a long ride tomorrow." They arranged their bedrolls close together, sharing both blankets against the night's chill. Catherine fell asleep quickly, her breathing deep and even. Samuel lay awake longer, watching the stars through the branches above, feeling Catherine's warmth beside him, and wondering at the strange turns his life had taken since the night she'd appeared on his porch. Morning came too soon, gray light filtering through the trees. They ate a cold breakfast, neither mentioning the kiss from the night before, though something had shifted between them, a new awareness, a tentative intimacy that manifested in small ways, a lingering touch when passing the canteen, eyes meeting and holding longer than necessary. They rode northwest, skirting the areas where they'd heard riders the day before. The country grew more rugged, forcing them to pick their way carefully through boulder fields and steep ravines. By midday, they'd reached a ridge overlooking a broad valley. In the distance, perhaps 15 miles away, Samuel could make out the faint outline of building Silver Creek. "We'll reach it by nightfall if we push on," he said, pointing. Catherine nodded, her expression resolute. "Then let's push on." They had descended halfway down the ridge when Samuel spotted them riders, 4 or 5, traversing the valley floor below. He raised a hand, signaling Catherine to halt. "Blackstone's men," she whispered, drawing her horse alongside his. Samuel studied the distant figures through his field glasses. "Hard to tell, but they're heading towards Silver Creek, same as us." "What do we do?" Samuel considered their options. "We can wait, let them get well ahead. Or we can find another route, though it would mean at least another day's travel." Catherine chewed her lip, thinking. "If we wait and they are Blackstone's men, they might set a trap for us in Silver Creek. But if we delay another day—" "The marshal could move on before we reach him," Samuel finished. "It's a gamble either way." After a moment's thought, Catherine straightened in her saddle. "Let's follow them, but at a distance. If they are Blackstone's men, we need to know what they're planning. And if they're not, we haven't lost time." Samuel nodded, impressed by her reasoning. "We'll keep to the high ground as much as possible, stay out of sight." They proceeded cautiously, using the terrain for cover whenever possible. The riders below maintained a steady pace toward Silver Creek, occasionally stopping to confer before continuing. By late afternoon, Samuel was increasingly certain they were indeed Blackstone's men. Their movements were too purposeful, too coordinated for ordinary travelers. "They're setting up a perimeter," he observed as they watched from a concealed position on a hill above the trail. "Stationing men at different approaches to the town." Catherine's face was grim. "They're expecting us." "Yes, but they don't know exactly when or from which direction." Samuel studied the town through his field glasses again. "There's a back way in through that ravine to the north. It leads behind the livery stable." "Will they have that covered too?" "Possibly, but it's our best chance. We'll approach after dark." They waited in the hills until dusk, sharing the last of their provisions. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the valley, Samuel noticed Catherine massaging her wounded shoulder. "How bad is it?" he asked quietly. "Manageable," she replied, though her tightened expression suggested otherwise. "Just stiff from riding." Samuel moved behind her, gently placing his hands on her shoulders. "May I?" At her nod, he began carefully working the muscles around the wound, avoiding the tender spots but addressing the tension in the surrounding tissue. Catherine's head dropped forward, a soft sigh escaping her. "Where did you learn this?" she murmured. "Field hospitals," Samuel answered, his fingers working methodically. Sometimes this was all we could offer for pain. When he finished, Catherine turned to face him, her eyes soft in the fading light. "Thank you," she said, and leaned forward to brush her lips against his. The kiss was brief but electric, sending warmth coursing through Samuel's veins. As she pulled away, he caught her hand, holding it against his chest. "Catherine," he began, uncertain how to express the tumult of feelings within him. She pressed her fingers to his lips. "Later," she promised. "When we're safe." Darkness fell completely as they made their final approach to Silver Creek. They left their horses tethered in a stand of trees and proceeded on foot, using the ravine Samuel had spotted earlier to access the town from behind. The livery stable was dark and quiet as they slipped past it into the narrow alley beyond. Silver Creek was a small settlement, one main street with businesses on either side, a few side streets with residences. The telegraph office was near the center of town, adjacent to the general store. "There," Samuel whispered, pointing to a man lounging against a hitching post outside the saloon. Even in the dim light, Samuel recognized Curtis Hatcher, the gunman who'd been at his cabin. "And there." He nodded toward another man positioned on the hotel porch. "They've got the telegraph office covered," Catherine observed. Samuel nodded grimly. "We need a diversion." They retreated deeper into the alley to confer. The plan they devised was simple, but risky. Samuel would create a distraction at the far end of town, drawing Blackstone's men away from the telegraph office long enough for Catherine to send a message to Marshal Holden. "If anything goes wrong, we meet at the church on the hill," Samuel said, pointing to the small steeple visible above the rooftops. "If I'm not there within an hour of the distraction, don't wait for me." Catherine gripped his arm. "No, we stay together." "Catherine, I won't leave you," she said fiercely. "We do this together or not at all." The intensity in her eyes gave Samuel pause. After a moment he nodded. "Together then. But if things go badly, you run. Promise me that." Reluctantly, Catherine agreed. Their diversion came in the form of a small fire, set in a trash pile behind an abandoned building at the edge of town. As the flames caught and grew, Samuel discharged his revolver twice into the air, creating the impression of trouble. The effect was immediate. Shouts arose from the main street, and they heard the pounding of boots as Blackstone's men ran toward the commotion. "Now," Samuel urged, and they dashed across the street toward the telegraph office. The door was locked, but a swift kick from Samuel splintered the jam. Inside, a startled telegraph operator rose from his desk, mouth open in surprise. "We need to send an urgent message to Marshal Holden," Catherine explained breathlessly. The operator hesitated, looking uncertain. "The office is closed for the night, madam." Samuel drew his revolver. "This can't wait. It's a matter of life and death." Reluctantly, the operator sat back down. "What's the message?" Catherine dictated quickly while Samuel kept watch at the window. The message was brief but clear. Evidence of Blackstone's crimes, request for immediate assistance, their location in Silver Creek. "Send it priority," Samuel instructed. "And not a word to anyone about us being here." The operator's fingers worked the key, tapping out the message. "It's sent," he said after a moment. but it might be days before the marshal, a shout from outside, cut him off. Through the window, Samuel could see men returning from the false alarm, one of them pointing toward the telegraph office's broken door. "Time to go," he said grimly, grabbing Catherine's arm. They fled through the back door just as Hatcher and another man burst through the front. Gunshots rang out behind them as they raced down the alley, bullets splintering wood around them. Samuel pulled Catherine behind a water trough as return fire. His shot caught one of Blackstone's men in the shoulder, spinning him back against the wall. Hatcher dove for cover, continuing to fire from behind a stack of crates. "The church," Samuel shouted over the gunfire. "Go, I'll cover you." Catherine hesitated only briefly before darting from cover, running low and fast toward the hillside path that led to the church. Samuel fired repeatedly, keeping Hatcher pinned down as he backed away, following Catherine's route. More of Blackstone's men appeared, converging on their position from different directions. Samuel turned and ran, zigzagging to make himself a difficult target as bullets kicked up dirt around his feet. The path to the church wound up a steep hillside, partially concealed by scrub brush and boulders. Samuel caught up to Catherine halfway up, both of them gasping for breath. "Keep going," he urged, grabbing her hand. "They're right behind us." They crested the hill together, the small white church just ahead. Its doors stood open, a rectangle of darkness in the pale building. They sprinted across the open ground, diving through the doorway as gunshots rang out behind them. Inside, Samuel slammed the door shut, throwing the heavy wooden bar across it. The church was dark and cool, moonlight filtering through stained glass windows to cast colored patterns on the simple wooden pews. "There must be a back way out," Catherine said, moving down the center aisle. Samuel followed, his revolver still drawn. "Even if there is, they'll have the place surrounded soon. We need to find a place to hold out until help arrives." The church was small, with a tiny vestry behind the altar and a narrow staircase leading to the bell tower. After a quick search, they determined there was no rear exit. "The tower," Samuel decided. "It gives us a vantage point and only one way up for them to come." They climbed the creaking stairs to the bell tower, which offered a clear view of the town below and the surrounding countryside. Through the open arches of the tower, Samuel could see men with torches moving up the hillside toward the church. "At least 8 of them," he noted grimly. "More than I thought." Catherine stood beside him, her face resolute in the moonlight. "The marshal will come," she said with more confidence than she likely felt. Samuel checked his ammunition, 6 shots left in the revolver, another 12 in his belt. Not enough if it came to a prolonged siege. Below, they heard the pounding of fists against the church door. "Preston." Hatcher's voice called up. "Northrop, we know you're in there. Come out now and Blackstone might let one of you live." Samuel and Catherine exchanged glances but remained silent. "Have it your way," Hatcher shouted after a moment. "Burn the place." Catherine gasped as torches were thrown against the wooden walls of the church. The dry timber caught quickly, flames licking upward. "They're going to burn us out," she whispered, horror in her voice. Samuel surveyed their precarious position. The bell tower was stone, but the staircase leading to it was wood. Once the fire reached it, they would be trapped. "The bell rope," he said suddenly, moving to where the thick hemp rope hung down the center of the tower. "We can use it to climb down the far side if we have to." A crash from below indicated the church door had given way. Smoke began to curl up the stairwell as the fire spread. Samuel positioned himself at the top of the stairs, revolver ready. "Stay back," he told Catherine. "If anyone tries to come up, I'll stop them." But the smoke grew thicker, making it clear no one would need to climb the stairs. The fire would do their work for them. The heat intensified, and Samuel could hear the crackle of flames consuming the church below. "We have to go now," he said, coughing. "The rope's our only chance." He secured the bell rope around a stone outcropping and threw the end out through one of the tower arches. It barely reached the ground, but it was their only option. "You first," he told Catherine. She gripped his arm. "Not without you." "I'll be right behind you," he promised. "Go." Catherine hesitated only a moment before grasping the rope and swinging out through the arch. Samuel watched anxiously as she descended, her wounded shoulder clearly causing her pain but not stopping her. When she reached the ground, Samuel prepared to follow, but a movement in the stairwell caught his eye. Through the smoke, he could see Hatcher climbing the stairs. Gun drawn, Samuel fired twice, forcing Hatcher back down. The stairs were beginning to burn now, flames licking at the wooden treads. He had seconds, not minutes. Grabbing the rope, Samuel swung out just as Hatcher fired upward through the smoke. A searing pain ripped through Samuel's side, but he held on, sliding down the rough hemp. Catherine was waiting at the bottom, her eyes wide with fear. "You're hit," she gasped, seeing the blood spreading across his shirt. "Keep moving," Samuel managed, clutching his side. "Into the trees." They fled into the darkness beyond the churchyard, the glow of the burning building lighting their path. Behind them, shouting indicated their escape had been discovered. Gunshots rang out, bullets thudding into trees around them. Samuel stumbled, the blood loss making him dizzy. Catherine caught him, supporting his weight as they pushed deeper into the woods. "Just a little further," she encouraged. "We need to reach the horses." But the wound was worse than Samuel had initially thought. Each step sent waves of pain through his body, and he could feel his strength ebbing. When his knees finally buckled, Catherine helped him to the ground behind a fallen tree. "Let me see," she insisted, pulling his shirt aside. The bullet had entered his lower right side, and from the amount of blood, Samuel knew it was serious. "It needs to be plugged," he gasped, "or I'll bleed out." Catherine tore strips from her petticoat, using them to create a pressure bandage. Her hands worked with surprising skill, packing the wound and binding it tightly. "Where did you learn this?" Samuel asked, his voice weak. "Watching you," she replied simply. "Hold on, Samuel, please hold on." The sounds of pursuit had faded somewhat, but Samuel knew they couldn't stay put for long. "The horses," he reminded her. "We need to reach them." With Catherine's help, he struggled to his feet. The makeshift bandage slowed the bleeding, but every movement sent fresh agony through him. Step by painful step, they made their way through the forest toward where they'd left their mounts. To their immense relief, the horses were still there, tethered and unharmed. Getting Samuel into the saddle was a challenge, but somehow Catherine managed it, then mounted her own horse. "Which way?" she asked, scanning the darkness. Samuel fought through the pain to think clearly. "North," he decided finally. "There's a mining camp about 10 miles up. Might find help there." They rode slowly, Samuel focusing all his energy on staying upright in the saddle. Catherine rode close beside him, ready to catch him if he fell. The night seemed endless, the forest dark and threatening around them. By the time the first gray light of dawn appeared in the east, Samuel was barely conscious. The blood had soaked through Catherine's bandages, and his skin was clammy and pale. "Samuel," Catherine's voice seemed to come from far away. "Samuel, stay with me. Look, there are cabins ahead." Through blurred vision, Samuel could make out rough wooden structures nestled in a clearing ahead. The mining camp. As they approached, men emerged from the cabins, alerted by the sound of horses. "Help," Catherine called. "Please, he's been shot." The next hours passed in a haze of pain and disjointed images for Samuel. Rough but gentle hands carrying him into a cabin. A grizzled old man with a mining camp doctor's rudimentary skills probing the wound. Catherine's face, pale with worry, swimming in and out of focus above him. The bullet passed clean through, he heard someone say. "But he's lost a lot of blood. Will he live?" Catherine's voice tense with fear. "If infection doesn't set in, he's got a chance. He's strong." Darkness claimed Samuel after that, deep and complete. When he next opened his eyes, sunlight was streaming through a small window. He was lying on a narrow cot in a crude cabin, a heavy quilt covering him. The pain in his side had dulled to a persistent throb. "Catherine," he called, his voice barely above a whisper. She appeared instantly at his side, her face lighting up with relief. "You're awake," she said, taking his hand. "Thank God, you've been unconscious for 2 days." Samuel tried to sit up but found he lacked the strength. "Blackstone's men haven't found us yet," Catherine assured him. "The miners have posted lookouts. And there's news Marshal Holden received our telegraph. He's on his way with deputies." Samuel relaxed slightly at this. "The miners are helping us," Catherine nodded. "They have no love for Blackstone. He's been trying to force them off their claims for months." She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "Rest now. You need to regain your strength." Samuel captured her hand, holding it against his chest. "You saved my life." Catherine's eyes grew soft. "You saved mine first, remember? I think that makes us even." For 3 more days, Samuel drifted in and out of consciousness as his body fought to heal. Catherine rarely left his side, changing his bandages, coaxing him to drink broth, and cooling his fever when it spiked. On the morning of the 4th day, Samuel woke feeling clearer-headed than he had since being shot. Catherine was dozing in a chair beside the bed, her head resting at an awkward angle that would surely leave her with a stiff neck. "Catherine," he said softly. She startled awake immediately, her eyes finding his. "Samuel, how do you feel?" "Better," he said, surprised to find it was true. "Hungry, even." Relief washed over her face. "That's a good sign. The doctor said your fever breaking was the turning point." She stood, stretching. "I'll get you something to eat." "Wait," Samuel caught her hand. "Sit with me a moment." Catherine settled on the edge of the bed, her expression questioning. "These past days," Samuel began, organizing his thoughts with effort. "While I was drifting in and out, I had time to think about what happens next." "Samuel, you don't need to." "I do," he interrupted gently. "Catherine, before you stumbled onto my porch, I thought my life was set. I'd resigned myself to solitude, convinced myself it was what I wanted." He squeezed her hand. "I was wrong." Catherine's eyes widened slightly, but she remained silent, allowing him to continue. "I don't know what the future holds," Samuel went on. "Blackstone is still a threat. We may have to leave Montana when this is over. But whatever comes next, I want to face it with you, if you'll have me." Tears welled in Catherine's eyes. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Samuel Northrop?" Despite the pain in his side, Samuel smiled. "I suppose I am, though it's hardly the romantic proposal you deserve." Catherine leaned forward, her hand coming up to cup his cheek. "It's exactly what I deserve," she whispered. "A honest proposal from an honest man." Her lips met his in a gentle kiss. "Yes, Samuel, yes." Their moment was interrupted by a commotion outside the cabin, shouts and the sound of horses approaching. Catherine rushed to the window. "Riders coming," she reported, tension in her voice. "A dozen at least." Samuel struggled to sit up, reaching for his gun belt hanging on a nearby peg. "Help me up." "You're in no condition to fight," Catherine protested. Before they could argue further, the cabin door opened, and a miner Samuel recognized as Caleb, one of their protectors, stepped in. "It's the marshal," he announced. "Marshal Holden and his deputies. They've come for Blackstone." Relief flooded through Samuel, leaving him light-headed. Catherine steadied him as they moved to the door to see for themselves. Outside, a group of riders was dismounting in the center of the camp. At their head was a tall man with iron-gray hair and a weathered face, the silver star of a U.S. Marshall pinned to his vest. "That's them," Catherine breathed. "We did it, Samuel." Marshall Holden approached as Catherine helped Samuel to a bench outside the cabin. "Miss Preston, Mr. Northrop," the marshal asked, studying them keenly. "I received your telegraph. Seems you've stirred up quite a hornet's nest." "We have evidence of Blackstone's crimes," Catherine said, gesturing toward her jacket hanging inside the cabin. "Land deeds with forged signatures, records of bribes, a letter ordering the murder of a family who refused to sell their land." Holden nodded grimly. "That matches complaints I've been hearing for months, but no one's had proof before. Blackstone's been careful." "Is he in custody?" Samuel asked. "Not yet," the marshal admitted. "But we raided his ranch yesterday. Found more evidence, and several of his men have turned on him, hoping for leniency. He's on the run, but we'll find him." "His men were hunting us," Catherine explained. "They nearly killed Samuel in Silver Creek." Holden's gaze shifted to Samuel's bandaged side. "You both look like you've been through hell, but it's over now. You're under my protection." For the first time in weeks, Samuel felt the tension begin to leave his body. With the marshal's arrival, the immediate danger had passed. Blackstone might still be at large, but he was now the hunted rather than the hunter. The next few days brought a flurry of activity to the mining camp. Deputies came and went, bringing reports of the search for Blackstone. More of his men were captured and gave statements corroborating Catherine's evidence. The territorial governor issued an official warrant for Blackstone's arrest on multiple counts of fraud, intimidation, and murder. Samuel's strength returned gradually. By the end of the week, he could walk short distances without assistance. Though the wound in his side still pained him, on the morning of the 8th day, Marshal Holden arrived with news that sent a wave of relief through the camp. Victor Blackstone had been captured trying to flee to Canada. He was in custody and would face trial for his crimes. "It's really over," Catherine said that evening as they sat outside the cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. "Thanks to your evidence and the testimony of his former men, Blackstone will spend the rest of his life in prison." Samuel nodded, his arm around her shoulders. "So what now, Miss Preston? Or should I say the future Mrs. Northrop?" Catherine smiled at the title. "Now we decide where to build our life together." She turned to face him. "Your cabin was burned, wasn't it?" "Most likely," Samuel agreed. "Blackstone's men wouldn't have left it standing." "Then we start fresh," Catherine said decisively. "Somewhere new." "I've been thinking about that," Samuel admitted. "Marshal Holden mentioned there's land available near Bozeman. Good soil, plenty of water, not too isolated but with enough space to breathe." "A farm?" Catherine asked, her eyes brightening. "If that's what you want." "Maybe some apple trees like your family had in Pennsylvania." Samuel took her hand, his expression growing serious. "Catherine, I can't promise it will be easy. I've been alone a long time. I might not be very good at this." Catherine leaned in, resting her forehead against his. "We'll learn together," she promised. "That's what matters." 2 weeks later, with Samuel sufficiently recovered to travel, they said goodbye to the miners who had sheltered them. Marshal Holden provided an escort to Bozeman, where they were welcomed as heroes of sorts, the people who had brought down Victor Blackstone. With the reward money offered for evidence leading to Blackstone's conviction, they purchased a plot of land 5 miles outside town, 30 acres of rolling hills, with a creek running through it, and a view of the mountains that took Samuel's breath away. They were married in Bozeman's small church on a crisp October day, with Marshal Holden standing as Samuel's best man and the wife of the local doctor attending Catherine. It was a simple ceremony, but as they exchanged vows, Samuel felt a profound sense of rightness that he had never expected to experience. That evening, standing on the porch of the small cabin they'd built on their new land, Samuel pulled Catherine close. "You ever think about that night?" he asked. "When you collapsed on my porch, bleeding half to death." Catherine nodded, her head resting against his chest. "It seems like another lifetime now. I was so certain I was going to die. And I was certain I wanted to live alone forever," Samuel said wryly. "It appears we were both wrong." Catherine lifted her face to his, her green eyes reflecting the sunset. "Gloriously wrong," she agreed, before rising on her tiptoes to kiss him. In the spring, they planted apple trees in neat rows along the southern slope of their property. Samuel built a larger house with his own hands, with help from neighbors who had quickly become friends. Catherine started a small school in one room of their home, teaching the children from nearby farms. By their first anniversary, Catherine's rounded belly carried the promise of new life. Samuel found himself both terrified and exhilarated by the prospect of fatherhood, a future he had never imagined for himself in the lonely years after the war. Their son, David, was born on a snowy December night, with Samuel delivering his own child after the doctor was delayed by the weather. Holding his son for the first time, Samuel felt the last of his old wounds begin to heal. 2 years later, their daughter Emma joined the family, followed by twin boys, James and Michael, 3 years after that. Their home rang with children's laughter, a sound Samuel had once thought he would never hear. Catherine's apple orchard thrived, eventually producing fruit that became famous throughout the county for its sweetness. Samuel found peace in working the land and raising his family, the nightmares of war gradually fading with each passing year. On the 10th anniversary of the night Catherine had collapsed on Samuel's porch, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the orchard's dappled light. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked quietly. "Coming west, all that happened with Blackstone." Catherine considered the question, her hand finding his. "How could I regret the path that led me to you, to this?" She gestured toward their children, their home, the life they had built together. Samuel squeezed her hand, thinking of the frightened, wounded woman who had appeared in his life when he least expected it, and how that moment had changed everything. He thought of the solitary man he had been, convinced that isolation was his only option, and marveled at the fullness of the life he now led. "Neither do I," he said simply, pulling her close. And as the Montana sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Samuel Northrop, once a solitary man determined to avoid connection, held his wife in one arm and watched his children play, knowing he had found a peace he never thought possible, all because a bleeding woman had collapsed on his porch one fateful night.